You're listening to Shoe In, covering the ins and outs of all things footwear, from sneakers to heels, loafers to slippers, and every type of shoe in between. Brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear.
Hey, Shoe and Show listeners, welcome back to another exciting edition of the world's greatest footwear business podcast, and I think probably the only one that's out there, but we'll claim the greatest at all times. Thomas, you are joining me on today's program because there's some brands that are out there. Maybe we're the two worst guys to talk to our next guest because I don't know about our fashion sense, but there are brands out there that are about as iconic as you can get, particularly in the fashion space, and Michael Kors is definitely one of those brands. It's the logo you see everywhere, all over the place, worldwide. I'm sure, like you, with a wife and several young daughters, might have a Michael Kors bag or a pair of shoes in your house, as do I, many. But I'm really excited about today's conversation because it's a board member, an FDRA board member, which is always fun to have in. And she has a ton of experience, so I'm happy to have her on, and I want you to make sure that we introduce her properly. So who is on Shoe and Show today?
All right, so we are very excited to bring in Jung Yoon, who is the Senior VP of Production and Sourcing for Accessories and Footwear for Michael Kors. We're really excited to talk to you today, and just want to start off by first, thank you for coming on the show. And second, we do this with a lot of guests, but what is your shoe story? How did you get into shoes? How did you get into the industry? Would love to hear that.
Sounds good. Thomas and Matt, thank you for having me. All right. The shoe story is, I guess I would say that it was kind of an accidental introduction to fashion and shoe in general for me. My academic background is actually in business/marketing and statistics. And so that's my major. I really thought that I was going to sort of insurance, actuary, calculation of the risks, and a lot of math and statistics. Or I was going to the business and perhaps make a lot of money. And I really wasn't thinking fashion or footwear or manufacturing when I was in school or just graduated. So I got into high-tech industry first. So that's how my career started as a assistant buyer for a telecom industry back in 90s when it was really hot industry like AI is today.
Right.
And I think that I realized that I really wanted to be in a business where I can actually see things and touch things instead of just codes and numbers. So I was thinking, would it be more interesting if I buy something that I can actually understand? So I was loosely thinking that when I lost my interest in high-tech purchasing, and I saw an advertisement, and I really didn't think fashion immediately, but in the advertisement back in the day on Wednesday, there was always like a job advertisement on WWD. And I said, They said, no experience is needed and we'll train you. And so that's how I started in Garment Center in a tiny company. It was a trading company, if you kind of look back, for garments and fabric and leather. But I've learned a ton. And I was thinking I was going to work there for just a couple of years until I find a real job. But that's how I got sucked in. And it was just really fascinating. Constant emergency, constant pivoting. And, because in fashion industry, there's introduction every season, every month. And so there's constant rush of adrenaline in a way that you have to problem solve in much quicker pace. And I think that really kept me interested. And I stayed in the industry ever since.
Well, how did you go from the agency to Michael Kors? Because those are two kind of different, operations within the industry.
Yeah, totally. I will say that the agency has taught me so much because I had so many different tiers of customers, all the way from Gap, Jones Apparel Group, to very, very high-end fashion brands. So that's where I learned, not only how to manufacture and what kind of criteria is needed for quality assurance, negotiations and logistics and supply chain mapping, but also understanding customers' requirements aesthetically as well as quality assurance. And so I was preview to everyone's requirements, what they're testing for, what they're, focusing on, ensuring in terms of aesthetic intent and the quality. So I had understanding of all of it. I didn't think that it was going to be very useful until I got my job as a manager of material sourcing at Coach. This is year 2000 or 2001 when Coach just went public at the time, and they were just leather company making a few styles of handbags, and they were venturing out to logo and other fabrics, and they just needed more than just leather buyer for hardware, trim, all of it. And that I had that experience from my agency business. And so I was at Coach, and I'm proud to say I helped to create their first materials testing requirements, because I had learned the requirements from many other brands, and I had my perspective on what's important and what's not important, and I was able to start that way. So I think, I would say that is still the industry testing norm from that manual that was created in 2001. So I think that, so that's how I started in leather goods industry for the first time, because prior to that, it was more garment focused. And I was at Coach for 13 years, came to Michael Kors as a vice president for accessories division, managing sourcing and production. Left briefly to go to Alexander Wang, and then went to Kate Spade, and then I came back to Michael Kors. So I think multiple brands, private as well as public. But in terms of accessories and footwear, Michael Kors is obviously a very renowned brand, but I'm really proud to say that having gone through all of the quality aspect of training from my previous job, as well as very complex supply chain management from high end to lower end, from my garment days as well as leather goods days, it really taught me a lot to be flexible and think outside of the box and not afraid to be changing, pivoting based on what's happening in the world. So that's how I am. But it's my second time at Michael Kors, and I mean, it's amazing to be asked to come back, and I love the culture here also and the quality we're producing.
It seems too with our industry, there's this culture within our industry where we're very collaborative, really kind of a footwear family. And so just wondering from your perspective, kind of what makes the industry unique from other industries. I'll ask that first. And I've got some, I thought of another one too, but love to get your thoughts on it.
I will say that when I first started in footwear specifically, I was a little bit intimidated because people were saying, the shoe dog, you're not a shoe dog. Or when I first started to manage as a vice president for footwear division for, product development and production, I think there was some sense from the team I inherited that, okay, you're not a shoe dog or shoe person. And I used to hear that all the time. I will say that the concept of manufacturing really is transferable. And, technical knowledge, I feel that if you want to, it's really easy to gain. I mean, you just need to pick apart the shoe, and it's not very complicated to see. So I think there's kind of a myth out there that shoes are so complicated and only the quote unquote shoe dogs understand it. But I really want to say that it's not true. I mean, if you understand manufacturing and product, and you can pick it apart to understand the components, it's really pretty simple because it's all there in the product. I will say that it was a little bit, I would say least transparent industry because it was complex and because there's so many components. And the buyers, it was really hard for them to even care about some of the small components. Yet there's a lot to manage and that there's sizing involved. So I would say what's unique about shoe is that people really need to care about the product because there's so many components that are hidden that can make or break the integrity of the shoe. If the heels break, there's a liability, someone can be hurt. So there's definitely engineering aspect and architectural aspect to the shoe, as well as comfort, as well as the beauty of the shoe, because it is part of the, your outfit, and fashion element is definitely important for the shoe. So there's comfort, there's engineering, there's technology, architecture, and sizing. And so the manufacturing is very complex. And so I think for the people who are in this industry, they have to be a very multifaceted thinker from all angle, not just from the customer standpoint, but quality standpoint. But managing quality for shoes are definitely more complex than accessories or garments.
So let me ask real quick, and then you jump in with your question, Thomas. What I'm hearing from you, Jung, is that because you were in the kind of the high tech buying space where you everything was like in the theoretical or in the cloud at the time, if you will, even though maybe it wasn't a cloud at the time, but it wasn't tangible, that you've migrated into this industry that's very tangible. You can touch, taste, feel it, smell it. You can smell the leather. You can smell the glue. You can go to the factory, which I know you travel the world and do. That actually, because you were moving into this space that had a tangible product, you were much more in tune to say, you know what, it's actually not that complicated. It's not that intimidating to come in and claim the mantra or claim the mantle that you are a shoe dog. Indeed, it just all you got to do is kind of break down a shoe and figure out how it's made.
Totally. I mean, it's definitely tangible. It's easy, and when there's a problem, you can really, really look at it and fix it. So I feel that if you are a good student and you're curious to really figure it out, I think anyone with that attitude can figure this out.
The other thought I had when you were talking about your background and working in different environments and different companies, how have you seen the industry change, even in the past few years? What are some of the ways that it's different than maybe when you started?
I think the industry itself attracts higher talent today, for sure. I think year 2000 or even in 90s when I first started in fashion or manufacturing industry, thinking it would be my temporary job, it was purely the perception of, people with business degree or MBA. I mean, they really didn't think manufacturing and fashion industry to be complex or stimulating intellectually. But now that I'm here, I think this is really the most stimulating and thought-provoking industry as a leader to be making decisions. And so I would say now, as our fashion brands and shoe brands and accessories brands are becoming a public entity and bigger in size, I think obviously benefits and all of that has improved, and that it is attracting much higher talent than, let's say, 20, 30 years ago. So, and also business realizing that it's not just about manufacturing. I think when I first started, there's so much emphasis around how it's made and the manufacturing, the last and this and that. But to me now, it's so consumer focused. So if you don't understand the consumer's needs closely, it really doesn't matter what kind of last you're making. I mean, to me, the shift is that what does consumer want? That first, right? And then there's a lot of knowledge to be gained by different pool of talent who's focusing on understanding the customer. From there, you can then decide assortments, the color, and what is really needed. And then you can translate that into the product, how to make, and what kind of testing is needed, and so forth. So before, I think it was more about, okay, I have a product that I created. How am I going to market it? And now it's reversed. So in that sense, fashion industry and even in manufacturing, high-tech intelligence, market research, data analytics, those are becoming more and more important. And I think even though I manage production and sourcing, because I'm very academic, my background is always in data and number and to a degree processing or process of a lot of information and to make final decisions. Even in managing supply chain and production, that has been really helpful. And in today's world, the trade and supply chain is so global. So all of that is to say that we are attracting different talent in the field, not just someone who loves fashion or someone who loves, fixing the shoe or technician who really care about only the fit or the comfort. I think everyone needs to have more holistic view to be in the business. And I kind of like the shift.
I like that too. So let's unpack kind of the where we are now, let's talk about the real world. Jung, there's a lot, and you really honed in on your ability to pivot. It's one of your skill sets, just based on working at the agency in particular. So, never in your wildest dreams or nightmares would you have been sitting in like the 2001 Jung, thinking about what was going to happen in 2020, 2021, 2022, and how agile and flexible you had to be then. And so, talk to us about kind of your journey through the pandemic, the inventory, the run on inventory, the inventory glut, and then now kind of as we figure out normal, and then conflict strikes in the Red Sea, you're a global brand. Walk us through kind of what your headspace is right now relative to the global supply chain and your role there at Michael Kors.
That's a really good question. I'm sure all of the leaders within my, realm think about this all the time. So pandemic and the shutdown, obviously not thinkable, especially the duration in which it lasted. And we had to change the calendar for our company to accommodate for that. But there was a lot of unpredictability, how long each supplier was going to be closed and so forth. To me, what I learned is that everyone in the organization has to stay flexible and have a culture of collaboration and transparency, because there is a responsibility on every party. So what I would say is that for production, so development and design internally, we had changed the calendar to try to accommodate for some of the shift, which took a monumental shift. But with partnership and collaboration, we were able to do that. Now we got the partnership from the factory, whoever are open. We were able to pivot from one supplier who's closed to the other. But some of the other brands that has a very bureaucratic decision-making processes, they probably couldn't pivot so quickly. But I think we have a culture of collaboration and trust, and that if I were to say this A supplier is closed, the other supplier is open, I can make this happen. I've worked with them before. Here's a test report. And I think people trusted at each other in their expertise to execute. So I think we were able to really pivot much more quickly than some of the other brands I'm aware of. And that lastly, it's not just about internal partners, but you need partnership from the factories, but also the port, the logistics. And what I would say is that one thing I personally have learned from all this is that the appreciation for the entities like FDRA, for example. I really, until the whole supply chain port issues, that what is really needed for us to get us to the finish line. I thought that each company can try their best, sourcing selection, supply chain mapping, mitigation plans. So the company can do everything right, but if the port is not working efficiently, then it'll never get to the store on time, which is what we saw. And that cannot be fixed by private companies or citizen. And I think we need to collaborate with an organization like FDRA and industry coming together to have the dialogue. And that is one thing I've learned, that, wow, I mean, it is true that there are things beyond control of one company or even 5 mega companies together, and that there is a lot of policies and regulations and local and governmental rules around how to make the commerce and trade seamless all the way to the customer's house. So that's one thing I've learned. And the other thing is that, the realization that macroeconomics and political tensions and geopolitical situation and global warming and all these things conceptually I thought were beyond my scope of job, those are what is impacting my job the most. Pandemic or commodity cost, if the oil price goes up. But why would oil price go up? Typically, if there's a conflict in Middle East. There are so many reasons why certain demand and supply change. And I think that is really, to me, the biggest learning coming out of supply chain issues, that, wow, all things that are impacting my business, what I manage, which is cost, delivery, quality, is not just from what my team does and what my factories do, but it's from all other aspects that, you need to pay attention to. So I would say today, or since many years ago, I would spend more time paying attention to what's happening in the globe as a prelude and prediction to what may happen in 6 months, a year, or 2 years' time, versus just worrying about one shoe at a time. I think that was a big shift in learning from the experience.
As we think about industry collaboration and staying connected and the challenges we all face, is there some particular issue or some issues that are kind of top of mind right now, thinking about what the industry needs to be looking at?
I think what is, to me, really challenging is there's a lot of conversation about sustainability, or how do we work to try to reduce the duty on footwear, because footwear duty rate is just really through the roof, but just industry understanding what we hope to see, whereas I think the regulation or other policies are not following pretty quickly. So taking sustainability as an example, there's a lot of emphasis and talk about sustainability, but we really don't know what is the true definition of how we need to see the emission or sustainability or pollution and how it's impacting and what we need to focus on. I think there are different metrics measuring different things, but there's no holistic view of, okay, after everything considered, what is more sustainable? What do we need to go after? And I think if you just leave it to consumer perception of sustainability, that's kind of dangerous. Or if you just leave it to the private sector to do the right thing, I think that's also a little bit challenging, because there's costs associated in R&D and trying to do, quote unquote, the right thing. Yet, public companies especially, you have to answer to the investors and so forth. And so I think whether it's government or some other agencies that are kind of spearheading the industry to say, and that this is the right direction, or to help to educate the customer collectively, I think that will be really helpful. I think when there's no consensus, I think that confuses the customer, but also confuses what the direction should be for someone like me in how to do the right thing for sustainability.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. So, Jung, last question as we close out. You get to the end of the year and you look back in your position at Michael Kors. What does success look like in 2024? What is your job to drive success for the company from your position?
I think it's really always staying nimble and learning what the customer is saying, what the economy is saying. Obviously, we have really incredible design team. We have Michael Kors himself, directing the design team, PR team. So everyone is doing their own job. But I do think that there's a lot to learn from what the customers are feeling and asking for, especially in fashion industry. I believe that the market for fashion, the shoes specifically, is so tied to lifestyle of everyday people. And everyday people's lifestyle is affected by their jobs, the economy, the outlook, and what's happening in their real life, right? So that is all linked together, and that we're living in such an unpredictable world in so many ways, and that it's always about paying attention to what the customers are wanting and looking for. And I trust our buyers and merchandising and design team to come up with the great assortments, and that my job is to make sure I can deliver that on time when they want it at the best cost and quality possible. So it's just staying in tune with what is needed, how do we need to pivot and be able to do that quickly but thoughtfully.
All right. I love it, Jung. Thank you for coming on Shoe and Show. Thanks for your conscientious participation on the FDRA board and at our events and on our calls. You really bring a lot to the organization. To me personally, you and I go back and forth on a lot of data. I can see your background through and through and some of the questions you ask. And so we really appreciate you coming on the program, but also being a part of the FDRA family. And I, as the president of All Shoes, as my daughters used to call me, can confer on you the title of shoe dog. You are thereby ordained a shoe dog. So congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And, I have to end by saying I join the weekly FDRA call really almost every week unless I am traveling, and that it's just been helpful. Going back to my comment about paying attention to the economy and the broader picture of the world, and for leaders to think, how do I use that information to be able to be more proactive as a leader? And thank you for hosting that call and all the work that you're doing in FDRA.
Yeah, we love it. Awesome. It's our pleasure. Folks, thanks for listening to another amazing episode where we are diving deep into the conversations that we have actually on the side in a lot of settings, but we want to bring these conversations to you. Make sure that you subscribe. You check back in next week for another great edition of the Shoe and Show podcast. Go to shoeandshow.com for all the latest episodes in our entire catalog spanning over 7.5 years. And in the meantime, we will talk to you next week. And Shoe and Show is out.
Shoe In has been brought to you by the FDRA, the Footwear Industries Association focused on retail, trade, politics, and fashion, helping create and enhance conversations on all things footwear. For information about FDRA, visit fdra.org.